I never thought a morning coffee run could turn into the most chaotic, surreal day of my life. But there I was, standing in my driveway, staring at the smoking wreckage of what used to be my beloved car, and trying to wrap my head around the fact that it wasn't an accident. Someone had taken it, and not just anyone. It was Karen's son. Yes, that HOA Karen. The one everyone in the neighborhood whispers about behind perfectly trimmed hedges and freshly painted fences. It all started with what I thought was a minor neighborhood squabble. Karen had a reputation for being controlling, but I never imagined her influence would extend to my personal life. I'd parked my car in my driveway the night before, locked it, like always, and went to bed. The next morning, I stepped outside to find a scene that could have been ripped straight out of a slapstick horror movie. My car was gone, and in its place, the faint smell of burnt rubber and exhaust smoke lingered in the air. At first, I thought maybe a tow truck had made a mistake, but the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. Something wasn't right. And then the messages started flooding in. Did you see what your car did? Call the cops before it's too late. Oh my God, it's at the corner of Elm and 5th. I grabbed my phone and rushed to the location, heart pounding. When I arrived, I froze. My car had collided with a tiny fire hydrant and a mailbox. The front bumper was smashed, the hood dented beyond recognition. But that wasn't even the craziest part. There, hanging from the back of a tow truck, like some bizarre carnival attraction, was a kid chained up and looking half terrified, half defiant. My stomach dropped. Could this really be Karen's son? Within seconds, the crowd that had gathered started whispering, pointing, some even laughing nervously. Is that him? One neighbor asked. I couldn't believe it. He was the one who had taken my car, the one causing this mess. And now he was literally chained to the tow truck. His reckless joyride had wrecked. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. I knew I needed to stay calm, but inside I was boiling. The story unfolding in front of me was insane. Who chains a kid to a tow truck? Who steals someone's car just to crash it minutes later? And most importantly, what on earth was Karen thinking, letting this happen? As I stood there watching the cops wrestle with the chaos, I realized something. This was only the beginning. The drama, the chaos, and the ridiculousness were about to spiral into something even crazier. And I was in the middle of it all. Before I could even process it, a police officer waved me over, looking both amused and frustrated. You're going to want to hear this from the beginning, he said. And that's when the story really started. The officer motioned for me to come closer, and I could feel the heat of embarrassment and disbelief mixing in my chest. This was no longer just about a stolen car. It was about the chaos that had been brewing in our quiet little neighborhood, hidden under perfectly manicured lawns and HOA-approved smiles. First things first, the cop began, shaking his head. You're going to want to sit down for this. I followed him to the side of the street, my mind racing. He explained that Karen's son, Jeremy, had taken my car in a reckless fit of boredom, or, as I'd soon learned, a twisted sense of entitlement. Apparently, he had been sneaking around the neighborhood for weeks, borrowing cars without permission just to see if he could get away with it. And now, my car had become the latest victim. I could barely comprehend it. This was the same kid who waved at me politely whenever I mowed my lawn or walked my dog. The same kid whose mother, Karen, made it her life mission to micromanage every little detail in our community. And yet, here he was, dangling from a tow truck, like some absurd cautionary tale. As I pieced the story together, the officers shared more details that made my jaw drop. Apparently, Jeremy had been drinking energy drinks, blasting music, and speeding down the block when he misjudged a turn and hit the mailbox and hydrant. The tow truck arrived just in time to prevent him from completely destroying the car, or worse, hurting himself. The tow truck driver, seeing Jeremy's panicked state, had improvised by chaining him to the truck until the police arrived. And then the confession. Jeremy, in a shaky voice, admitted everything. "I just wanted to see if I could, I don't know, take it for a spin," he said, looking genuinely regretful, but still defiant. He claimed he didn't mean to damage the car, didn't mean to cause chaos, didn't mean to end up in this bizarre situation. But the more he talked, the more absurd it sounded. Every excuse was laced with entitlement and recklessness, and it was clear that boundaries weren't something he was accustomed to respecting. Meanwhile, Karen arrived on the scene, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her expression a mix of fury and panic. "What in the world is going on?" she demanded, pointing fingers at everyone but her son. Watching her try to control the narrative while her own child dangled in chains was surreal, like watching a sitcom play out in real life, only way more intense. The officers took statements from neighbors, Jeremy, and even me, carefully documenting the situation. It was officially chaos. One of those, "I can't believe this is happening in my neighborhood" kind of moments. And while I tried to keep my cool, part of me couldn't help but think, how did a quiet suburban morning spiral into this level of madness? By the time Jeremy was escorted to the police car, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The real chaos was just beginning. Karen, never one to let anyone else have the spotlight, immediately went into full-on damage control mode. She stormed toward the officers, her voice sharp and commanding, insisting they treat the situation appropriately and implying that I had somehow provoked her son. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Provoked? My car was totaled. And yet here she was, twisting reality like it was one of her HOA meetings. The neighbors, who had gathered in droves, were now buzzing like bees in a hive. Some were gossiping, some were laughing nervously, and a few brave souls were actually filming the entire spectacle. My heart sank as I realized this was about to become that story in our neighborhood. The one everyone tells at HOA meetings, birthdays, and weekend barbecues. While Karen tried to negotiate Jeremy's release with an intensity usually reserved for corporate boardrooms, I noticed something that made my blood boil. She wasn't worried about the damage, the stolen car, or her son's reckless behavior. She was worried about appearances, and her relentless control over the neighborhood meant she could try to spin the story her way. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I stepped forward, trying to explain what happened from my perspective. But Karen cut me off, insisting, "You must have provoked him somehow. He's a good boy. He would never." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a polite laugh, but a "this is absurd" kind of laugh. It was like living in a sitcom where the rules of reality bent to her whims. Meanwhile, Jeremy, still grumbling in the back of the police car, shot me a look that said, "This is your fault, too." As the officers tried to mediate, the tension skyrocketed. Statements were taken, cameras were pulled out, and the chaos unfolded like a live-action soap opera. I realized then that this wasn't just about a stolen car. It was about power, perception, and control. Karen's attempts to manipulate the story highlighted something deeper: the toxic grip some people hold over their communities. And Jeremy, oblivious to the real consequences of his actions, had become the catalyst for the ultimate neighborhood meltdown. Eventually, the police concluded that Jeremy would face consequences for theft, reckless driving, and property damage. But not before Karen attempted to intervene one last time, pleading for leniency while framing me as the problem. I could barely contain my disbelief. The surreal nature of the day was reaching new heights. As I finally got a chance to inspect my car, I realized the damage was worse than I thought. The bumper, the hood, the lights, it would all need replacement. And yet, despite the stress, part of me couldn't help but see the absurd humor in the situation. My car had been stolen, crashed, and turned into a neighborhood spectacle, all because of one entitled kid and his controlling mother. By the time the sun began to set, the crowd had dispersed, but the chaos lingered in the air. This was more than just a car accident. It was a story that would haunt the neighborhood for months. And for me, the lesson was clear: never underestimate what a Karen and her son could do. The next morning, I woke up to a neighborhood buzzing with whispers, notifications, and the occasional chuckle from people who had witnessed the chaos unfold. Social media had exploded overnight. Videos of Jeremy dangling from the tow truck were everywhere, shared with captions ranging from "You won't believe this HOA drama" to "Karen's kid is a menace." I couldn't help but groan. My private nightmare had officially gone viral. Despite the embarrassment, I knew the real work had to begin: repairing my car, dealing with insurance, and most importantly, ensuring Jeremy faced real consequences. When the police called me later that morning to provide a full statement, I felt a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Karen had tried to argue, to manipulate, and to control the narrative. But the truth was now out there, impossible to spin. Jeremy had admitted everything. The videos were proof. There was no escaping accountability. When I went to the tow yard to retrieve my car, the sight was almost comical if it weren't so infuriating. My car looked like a crumpled tin can with wheels. The bumper hung loosely. The hood bore a giant dent, and shards of glass glimmered across the pavement like tiny shards of memory. From that insane morning, the tow truck driver, still chuckling about the spectacle, apologized for the chain incident, but admitted he didn't know what else to do when Jeremy refused to stop. Honestly, I couldn't blame him. It was either chain the kid or risk more destruction. Meanwhile, Karen attempted one last power move, arriving with her signature glare and a stack of papers in hand, claiming she would take this all the way to the HOA board. I stood my ground, ignoring her theatrics, while Jeremy sulked beside her, suddenly aware that the thrill ride was over. For the first time that day, he seemed small, powerless, and human. Weeks later, after police reports, insurance claims, and neighborhood gossip finally settled, I reflected on the madness. Jeremy faced legal consequences, fines, community service, and mandatory driving courses. Karen, on the other hand, retained her reputation as the neighborhood tyrant. But now, with an embarrassing viral moment permanently attached to her name and me, I got my car back, patched up, dented, but a little wiser. The most surprising twist, though, came unexpectedly. One evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Jeremy. He wasn't chained. He wasn't defiant. And he certainly wasn't in trouble. He held a small apology note and a bouquet of flowers, intended, I assume, to apologize for the chaos he had caused. And in that moment, something shifted. The story that started as theft, destruction, and absurdity ended with a tiny glimmer of humility. A chaotic chapter in my life had finally closed. Looking back, I realized how bizarre, hilarious, and stressful this experience had been. One entitled HOA kid, one controlling mother, and one stolen car had turned an ordinary neighborhood into a living drama. And somehow, in the middle of all that madness, life found a way to teach lessons about accountability, boundaries, and the unpredictable chaos of human behavior. And that's the story of the day. HOA Karen's son took my ride without permission. And how the police, the neighborhood, and a chain tow truck brought it all to an unforgettable, jaw-dropping climax. Listen, if you thought this chaos was wild, just wait until the next one. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss the next insane neighborhood meltdown. Smash that like button if you love watching total chaos unfold, and drop a comment telling me what you would do if Karen's son showed up at your driveway like this. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this madness. Subscribe, like, comment, now, before the next crazy story hits. Don't just watch, be part of the chaos.